on behalf of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you for the Women's Day celebrations for the year 2026. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout history, women have fought and come forward to fight for democracy and the rule of law. And today we are happy that throughout the globe, women have become leaders in politics, in law, social change, so on and so forth. As Sri Lankans, we are proud to say that we have produced the first ever female Prime Minister in the world. Having such honor also gives an idea about equality in Sri Lanka. And we are also happy that women are leaders in the legal profession. And today, women outnumber men when it comes to those who are entering the legal profession. So in this regard, we are happy as the Bar Association of Sri Lanka to celebrate International Women's Day to firstly acknowledge the great work done by women leaders in Sri Lanka and also to reinforce our commitment for equality in the future. And in this context, we are happy to welcome all of you, especially Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, our chief guest this evening. We are happy to have you here, madam. And we are happy to have all of you here for this Women's Day celebration. And to begin today's celebrations, giving place to our traditions, we will now begin. All of you to rise, and we invite the following dignitaries to light the traditional oil lamp. First and foremost, Her Ladyship, the Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, the Justice of the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, the President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. Mr. Nalin De Silva, the Secretary-elect of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Ms. Shiranti Gunawardena, Senior Attorney at Law. Ms. Yanini Veerasinghe, the head of legal of Brandix, one of our panelists for the day at law, the moderator of the Women's Day celebration seminar on inclusive leadership, of the Women's Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee, Career Development Committee. Mrs. Renuka Jayatilaka of the Sri Lanka Women Lawyers Association, and Mrs. Aruni Gunasekara, Sri Lanka Women's Lawyers. And we also invite Ms. Indira Samarasinghe, President's Council, former Principal of Sri Lanka Law College. And we also invite Mrs. Dilrukshi Wickramasinghe, President's Council, to light the traditional oil lamp. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And now we request you to please stand in attention for the national anthem.
Cedric, I was looking for you, Cedric. No. When
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. This ceremony formally and also to welcome all of you. Nagaratna Kodagoda, the chairperson of the Women's Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee of the Bar Association of
privilege that I deliver this welcome speech this afternoon for our Women's Day celebration seminar on inclusive leadership, organized by the Women Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka in collaboration with the Sri Lanka Women Lawyers Association. It is with great respect that we extend our heartfelt welcome to Her Ladyship, the Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, Judge of the Supreme Court, who is the chief guest of this special celebration. And we are deeply honored by the gracious presence and an enduring emblem of dignity, wisdom, and judicial excellence. With a legacy marked by integrity and distinction, the Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe stands as a monumental inspiration to every woman in the legal profession. Further, we warmly and sincerely welcome the leadership of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka for their steadfast support, which is gratefully appreciated. Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. We are also privileged to welcome a distinguished panel of legal professionals whose commitment to justice and progress is truly commendable. Senior Attorney at Law, Mrs. Shiranti Gunawardena, Professor Vasanta, Senior Professor of Law, University of Colombo, Mrs. Janini Veerasinghe, Legal Head of Brandix, also Mrs. Tanushka Gunawardena, Attorney at Law, the moderator of this Women's Day celebration seminar on inclusive leadership. Also, we warmly welcome President's Council, senior members of the Bar, and Mr. Upul Jayasuriya, President's Council, Mr. Nalindi Silva, Secretary elected, and Executive Committee members of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. At the time, it is our pleasure to warmly welcome all the invitees here with us today. Moreover, we warmly welcome the registered delegates of this Women's Day celebration seminar on inclusive leadership and apprentices and law students. As we gather on the eve of the International Women's Day, we do so not merely to commemorate, but to reflect, to engage, and to recommit ourselves to a profession and a society that recognize the value of inclusion as a cornerstone of leadership. Leadership is about responsibility. It is about vision. And above all, it is about the courage to create space for diverse voices, diverse experiences, and diverse perspectives. It calls upon us to foster environments where merit thrives, where dignity is preserved, and where opportunity is genuinely accessible. Within the legal profession, these ideas are practically significant. The law shapes institutions. It influences governance. It safeguards rights. If our leadership within the profession is not inclusive, then the justice we strive to uphold risk being incomplete. Today's program reflects the richness of perspectives necessary for this conversation. We are equally privileged to hear from leaders beyond the courtroom, voices from academia, from corporate leadership, and from the participating bar, who will bring multidisciplinary insight to our discussion. Inclusivity is not to one sphere. It transcends sectors and reminds us that collaboration enriches us all. Finally, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome you all to this seminar on inclusive leadership. I look forward to an engaging and meaningful program. Thank you for being part of this landmark Women's Day celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, Nobel Prize winning Malala Yousafzai has mentioned that we cannot succeed if half of our population is discriminated. And it is important that empowerment happens to the entire population in whatever the field, let it be the professional level and let it be the general public. And that is what the Bar Association firmly believes in. The Bar Association, throughout its history, has held very firmly that women's empowerment is important, not only for the progression of the Bar Association, but also for the progression of the entire country. And we are happy that the current Bar Association, headed by President Rajiv Amarsurya, has conducted many programs for the empowerment of women. And the Bar Association has celebrated women leaders in the bar and encouraged young lawyers, young female lawyers to come forward and to take the stage. And in this vision, we are happy to celebrate Women's Day. So in this light, we are happy to invite the President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, Mr. Rajiv Amarsurya, Attorney at Law, to address all of you on this momentous occasion.
Your Ladyship, Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, our chief guest this afternoon, the Secretary-elect, Mr. Nalin De Silva, President's Council, senior instructing attorneys, members of the distinguished panel of resource persons we have, and the panel we will hear from shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka for this important forum and discussion on inclusivity, which is being organized in conjunction and in celebration of the upcoming Women's Day. I must take this opportunity at the outset to thank Your Ladyship, Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, for accepting our invitation to be the chief guest today and also to deliver the keynote address in spite of Your Ladyship's very busy schedule. In fact, I was in Your Ladyship's court this morning and looking at that list, the cases that were marked ready, I was actually wondering whether Your Ladyship would be able to come here. But thank you very much. I subscribe to everything that our chairperson, Mrs. Indika Nagaratte, mentioned about Your Ladyship. And one more thing I want to add is that Your Ladyship has always been a true friend of the bar. And thank you for that. We are greatly appreciative of all that you have done and all that you will continue to do, and also accepting today's invitation and being with us. I must also thank the committee chaired by Mrs. Indika Nagaratte Kottegoda together with Ms. Nalini Manatunga and the team, that is the BASL Women Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee, for all the hard work. This is one of many programs they have had. And what is special in this particular program is that it is organized in conjunction and in collaboration with the Sri Lanka Women Lawyers Association, of course, headed by Mrs. Shiranti Gunawardana, Senior Instructing Attorney. And I can see many of the office bearers and members also in this audience. So thank you to all of you for all the hard work you have put in to recognize and celebrate this important occasion. As I was jotting down my notes on what to speak to you about, and one of the officers of the Bar Association, a young lady, came up to me and asked what the topic was. And I said, I have to speak a little bit on inclusivity. And her immediate response without thinking was, inclusivity is talked about always in March. And that stops. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what we need to change. It is not about talking about what we need to do in a given month of the year and then forgetting about it for the balance 11 months. That is why, as a Bar Association, we take these things very important, give a lot of importance to important initiatives such as this. We have spoken about inclusivity for eons, not only in respect of the legal profession, but in respect of every aspect of life. But if we are speaking about the legal profession as we are today, inclusivity comes in different forms. Inclusivity in terms of age and generations, inclusivity in terms of location, whether you're a practitioner outstation or a practitioner in Colombo. Inclusivity in terms of diverse work practices, whether as counsel, whether in the corporate sector, whether as instructing attorneys and so on, academics and so on. And finally, what we are discussing today, inclusivity in terms of gender. And the topic I have been asked to speak a few words on. Before getting into inclusivity, that aspect of inclusivity in terms of gender, ladies and gentlemen, we must first look at what does inclusivity in the legal profession actually mean. And to me, it means for all members, that all members should be valued, that all members should be respected, that all members should be heard, that all members should have equal opportunity to grow, all members should feel safe in their respective workplaces, and all members should feel that the profession belongs to each and every one of them. And to this extent, inclusivity, in my humble view, is not charity. Inclusivity is not the American term tokenism. It should not be optics, but it must necessarily be structural fairness. Then another question poses, rather the most important question, that is sometimes not emphasized enough in conversations in relation to inclusivity, which is who bears or who must bear the responsibility of inclusivity itself? Should it be those who one may say are excluded, or should it be those that hold influence? And obviously, you would agree with me that inclusivity, the need, the addressing of inclusivity is a responsibility of leaders. Whether they are leaders of bar associations, whether they are leaders of law firms, whether they are leaders of chambers, law chambers, institutions, corporations, universities, the judiciary, or other regulatory bodies. It is leadership that determines culture. And that is an important proposition. Leadership determines culture. And in turn, culture determines opportunity. Culture determines opportunity. And consequently, opportunity must determine equality. If we look at gender inclusivity in our legal profession, we need to acknowledge the very fact that we have a large number of women who are now coming into the system. At a recent event, again organized by the Women Lawyers Committee, I got the statistics down, and in fact, in our membership, we have a far more number of women members than men, and that is now the status. If you look at the law faculty, I remember when I was in the law faculty, in the English medium class, out of, I think, 22 or 23, in total, there are only 3 boys. And the law faculty is the same today with larger numbers. But given that, the women also perform exceptionally well. If you look at whether it's a law faculty, the law college, or any of these private universities, you would see that the women are right at the top. I don't know, Mr. D'Souza, what has happened to the men, but the women are now achieving success. But however, given that inflow coming into our system, we are yet to see, apart from some very good exceptions and examples, the seniority, at the seniority level, still the numbers are more with the men. And that is the question which I would also invite your panel to discuss. Why does this gap exist? It cannot be a lack of competence. We all agree that all are competent, and now I think the women are probably more competent when we see the results. Is it a lack of commitment? And that also we will not agree, because we don't see that. Or is it a lack of intelligence? Which is certainly not the case, which has been disproved. So then what is the purpose? What is the reason why we see a gap between what we see coming into the profession and then what we see at the top, of course, with exceptions we have in the front row and the second row in this hall. So that is what we need to address. And as a responsible profession, a leading profession in this country, we need to correct. And as I mentioned at the beginning, let us not limit this to the month of March. Let us look at initiatives which actually will bring change to a landscape. And that is why we are also working on a pillar of inclusivity at the Bar Association, and we welcome and appreciate all of these initiatives, not for the optics, not for the cameras, but for true change. So I would once again thank all of you, the resource persons, the organizing committee, all of those who have basically filled this large hall, and all of those who are connecting live to the BASL feed, which is now presently going on, for coming for this program, taking interest in making a difference and change, and let us together, committed and united as one, ensure that the necessary changes happen as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And we are happy that the Bar Association is continuing to renew their commitment for gender equality and women's empowerment. And ladies and gentlemen, maybe 100 years ago, it was unthinkable to see women lawyers. It was unthinkable to see women in politics. It was unthinkable to see women leading societies. And through revolutions and through years of fighting and social change. Today, we have come to a level where we see women in all spheres of leadership. And the most important thing that drives women to aspire to be leaders are leadership role models. Like I mentioned earlier, Sri Lanka is proud to be having the first female prime minister in the world. And just like that, we are also proud to have many accomplished and celebrated female judges, female leaders, female heads of state, female business leaders, so on and so forth. And next, ladies and gentlemen, we are happy to have another very celebrated female leader in Sri Lanka to address all of you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think it is right or it is necessary to give an introduction, but for formality, I will introduce none other than Her Ladyship, Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, Justice of the Supreme Court. Of course, Madam, if I go on to read all of your accomplishments, I don't think we'll have time in the program today, but I will read a very short a paragraph about how you inspire young lawyers of Sri Lanka today. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe is a justice of the Supreme Court, and she was an old girl of Visakha Vidyalaya, Colombo. And she took oaths as an attorney at law in 1986, and she holds a Master's of Arts in Theory and Practice of Human Rights from the University of Oslo in Norway. With over 39 years of experience in the legal field, she was also appointed as a session judge of the Supreme Court of Fiji, and she started her career as a state counsel in the Attorney General's Department, and she joined the judiciary as a High Court judge in 2006. Ladies and gentlemen, at that time of the appointment, she was the most senior state counsel. And thereafter, she was appointed as the Chief High Court judge and appointed to the Court of Appeal in 2015. She was acting as the president of the Court of Appeal before she was appointed to the Supreme Court in the year 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, since then, she has been inspiring thousands of young lady lawyers to come forward and she has shown that young lady lawyers are not merely an attorney at law, they also can be leading lawyers, they also can be leading justices, and they also can be leaders in the Bar Association and also in whatever the field they want to be. So, Madam, it is my great honor and privilege to invite you to speak a few words in this occasion.
President of the Bar Association, Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, other President's Council, senior attorneys, and my dear friends, and especially being celebrating the Women's Day, I must mention that I warmly welcome former presidents of the Women Lawyers Association and also two President's Council, Lady President's Council, Mrs. Indira and my former colleague Dilrushi. And also I would like to thank my dear friends, senior attorneys, and special thanks goes to very few remarkable President's Council, our brothers who are present here today. Because everywhere, especially in the courthouses, majority of them are men, though majority are lady lawyers. So here, this is the only occasion I rarely see that very few gentlemen are here. So I thank them for being here with us to listen to our thoughts and our version about ladies and our future. Thank you. So it is both an honor and a solemn responsibility to address this gathering, convened to reflect upon inclusive leadership as we approach the global commemoration of women's rights and equality marked annually on the 8th of March as International Women's Day by the United Nations. We are reminded that leadership within the legal profession is not merely a matter of individual professional advancement. It is a constitutional question, one that bears directly upon institutional legitimacy, meaningful access to justice, and the integrity of the rule of law. Inclusive leadership, in its truest sense, is leadership that consciously creates space for participation across lines of gender, ethnicity, class, and other historically marginalized identities. It is a model of leadership grounded in equity, accountability, and shared institutional ownership, one that does not merely tolerate diversity, but actively dismantles structural barriers, redistributes opportunity, and ensures that decision-making power reflects the plurality of the society the law serves. It demands not symbolic inclusion, but substantive equality in voice, authority, and influence. Inclusive leadership is not satisfied by entry-level participation. It concerns who occupies the apex of institutional authority, who shapes doctrine, who speaks for the profession, and who is visible as a symbol of justice. In assessing inclusivity, we must therefore examine not only representation at the bar in general, but representation in positions of decisive influence. At the international level, Sri Lanka's obligations are clear. As a state party to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Sri Lanka is a binding duty, there's an obligation to eliminate discrimination against women in political and public life, including participation in decision-making and public office. Article 7 explicit in requiring states to ensure women's equal participation in public functions. The Beijing Platform for Action identified women in power and decision-making as a critical area requiring structural reform. Likewise, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights guarantees equality before law and equal protection without any discrimination. These are not abstract commitments. They impose an obligation to interrogate institutional realities. Domestically, Article 12 of the Constitution guarantees equality before law and equal protection of the law. So we are all aware of it, but only think that we must see whether they are in fact, it is practical. That is the most important thing. That is why we are trying to make it. We are going to achieve it. Yet, formal equality without structural correction may mask entrenched disparities. The question we must candidly confront is whether our leadership structures within the profession reflect the constitutional promise of equal protection. Women enter Sri Lankan law faculties in substantial numbers. Professor Vasantha Senivaratna will vouch for that. They perform the distinction, yet as one ascends the professional hierarchy, a visible narrowing occurs. The number of women appointed as President's Council remains disproportionately low. While the rank is conferred on the basis of merit and eminence, the structural pathways that lead to visibility, complex litigation exposure, and sustained briefing patterns have historically been medicated by networks from which women have often been peripheral. Within the superior courts, representation is similarly limited. At present, there are only 2 lady justices in the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, including me, and none at the Court of Appeal of Sri Lanka. In the 225-year history of the Supreme Court, only 2 women have been appointed to the office of Chief Justice, and so far only 7 lady justices are being appointed, including me. These figures are not cited for rhetorical effect. They are institutional facts. They prompt reflection on whether the pipeline to judicial elevation operates with structural neutrality in practice. At the leadership level of the private bar, there has never been a woman president of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. This is a significant institutional reality. Symbolism in leadership matters. It communicates to younger members of the profession the boundaries perceived or real of aspiration. Similarly, within the executive branch of legal leadership, Sri Lanka has had only 1 woman appointed as an Attorney General. The Attorney General's Department of Sri Lanka is pivotal in shaping prosecutorial policy, constitutional litigation, and advisory governance. When women are absent or nearly absent from such positions, the system must examine whether structural impediments, conscious or unconscious, have constrained advancement. The existence of disparity does not itself prove discrimination in any individual appointment. However, persistent patterns over time invite structural analysis. Inclusive leadership requires that we move beyond anecdote to systematic evaluation. At this juncture, it is important to acknowledge that the present president of the Bar Association has demonstrated a commendable and genuine commitment to expanding opportunities for women within the profession. There is visible encouragement for greater participation of lady members in committees, panels, and professional initiatives. Such leadership from the top is not merely symbolic. It sets an institutional tone and signals that inclusivity is an organizational priority. So we must be thankful to the present president of the Bar Association for taking the initiative to encourage women in this profession. However, inclusivity is not a one-sided obligation. It is a shared responsibility. While institutional reform and opportunities provided by leadership are necessary, they alone will not effect meaningful change. Lady members of the profession must actively claim these opportunities with diligence, seriousness, and unwavering commitment. Leadership demands initiative, competence, and strict adherence to professional discipline. Equality is required. It requires that every member, regardless of seniority, maintain the highest standards of decorum and integrity that the profession mandates. Lapses in conduct, whether in communication, in failing to observe proper working hours for professional interactions, or in disregarding established practices, are unacceptable and frankly unprofessional. These are not minor formalities. They are essential markers of credibility, authority, and professional maturity. Anything less undermines not only individual advancement, but the collective integrity of the profession. Empowerment must therefore operate alongside responsibility. Great access to opportunity must be matched by an unwavering commitment to excellence, integrity, and professional conduct. The barriers confronting women in the profession remain multifaceted. First, briefing inequity, high-value commercial litigation, constitutional matters, and appellate advocacy often determine professional visibility. If such briefs are disproportionately channeled through historically male-dominated networks, the opportunity to build the portfolio necessary for elevation correspondingly narrows. Secondly, informal mentorship and sponsorship structures frequently operate through social proximity and long-standing professional alliances, where women are underrepresented in senior cohorts. Sponsorship pipelines may inadvertently replicate existing demographics. Thirdly, the asymmetrical distribution of caregiving responsibilities continues to affect uninterrupted practice. Institutional cultures that equate leadership readiness with uninterrupted availability may inadvertently penalize those who assume familial obligations. Without gender-neutral parental policies and flexible structures, attrition at mid-career stages becomes pronounced. Fourthly, implicit bias, through often subtle, can shape perceptions of authority. Assertiveness in male attorneys may be read as leadership. The same conduct in female advocates may be mischaracterized. Such cognitive distortions, though rarely explicit, influence evaluative judgments. Fifthly, safety harassment and reputational vulnerability remain under-acknowledged deterrents. A profession that does not visibly and decisively address such concerns risks losing capable practitioners before they reach seniority. These jurisdictions remind us that neutrality which perpetuates inequality is not genuine neutrality. Substantive equality may at times require recalibration of institutional practices. What then are the constructive pathways forward? First, transparent criteria and data publication regarding appointments to senior professional ranks and judicial office. Transparency strengthens confidence. Secondly, deliberate mentorship and sponsorship initiatives within the bar to ensure that capable women are strategically positioned for complex and high-profile litigation. Thirdly, institutional policies encouraging gender-balanced representation in panels, conferences, and professional committees. Visibility precedes advancement. Fourthly, a cultural recalibration that recognizes caregiving as a social function rather than a professional liability, supported by gender-neutral leave structures and flexible practice models. Inclusive leadership is not a concession to identity politics. It is an institutional strengthening mechanism, a judiciary and a bar that reflect the diversity of the community enhance public confidence and depend deliberative quality. Diversity of experience enriches doctrinal reasoning without compromising fidelity to the Constitution. We must also recognize that inclusivity extends beyond gender. It encompasses socio-economic background, linguistic identity, disability, and regional representation. However, the gender disparity at the apex levels of our profession remains a salient and measurable concern. When commemorating Women's Day, the objective is not to assign blame, but to assume responsibility. The profession has historically been at the forefront of democratic reform. It must now lead in ensuring that leadership structures are genuinely accessible to all who possess merit and integrity. The absence of a woman president of the Bar Association to date, the limited number of women presidents council, only 2 female chief justices, the presence of only 2 women in the Supreme Court, the absence of women in the Court of Appeal, and the singular historical appointment of a woman Attorney General are not merely statistics. They are indicators of work yet unfinished. Inclusive leadership demands institutional introspection, sustained reform, and collective commitment. It calls upon those who occupy positions of authority to widen pathways, not narrow them. It equally calls upon those who aspire to leadership to embody the discipline, decorum, and excellence that sustain the dignity of our profession. If we succeed in embedding substantive inclusivity within our leadership structures, we will not merely advance women, we will fortify the constitutional promise of equality itself. For a legal system that mirrors the diversity of its people is better equipped to administer justice with legitimacy, wisdom, and fairness. I thank the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, especially the President, for convening this timely discussion and for the clear and continuing commitment to promoting greater opportunities for women within the profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Ladyship, for that inspiring and reflective address. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the panel discussion, which is in line according to our agenda. And we would like to invite Ms. Charmaine Pereira to introduce the panelists for today and also to give a brief introduction of each of the panelists. Thank you.
Her Ladyship, Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, Executive Committee by Association of Sri Lanka, all the respected invitees and my dear colleagues. It is my great honor to introduce our esteemed panel of resource persons for today's Women's Day celebrations. Exceptional women whose leadership, dedication, and achievements continue to inspire us across the fields of law, academia, and corporate leaderships. First, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce Her Ladyship, Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe is an alumna of Vishaka Vidyalaya, Bambalapitiya. She took oaths as an attorney at law in 1986 and began her career as a state counsel in the Attorney General's Department. In April 2006, she joined the judiciary as a High Court judge, later serving as Chief High Court Judge. She was appointed to the Court of Appeal in February 2015, where she also acted as president before her elevation to the Supreme Court in 2020. Throughout her judicial career, Her Ladyship has consistently upheld fairness, equality, and constitutional principles, making significant contributions to civil, criminal, and constitutional jurisprudence in Sri Lanka. Beyond the bench, she has actively campaigned gender equality within the justice system and strengthened access to justice for women and vulnerable communities. Her Ladyship's remarkable journey stands as a powerful inspiration to young women and professionals across the country. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Vasantha Seneviratne, Senior Professor and Chair of Public and International Law at the University of Colombo and Director of the Center for the Study of Human Rights. An attorney at law since 1995, Professor Seneviratne brings together decades of academic excellence and legal expertise. With nearly 3 decades of teaching and research in international law, human rights law, and international humanitarian law, she has made outstanding contribution to the legal education and scholarship. She mentors emerging scholars, supervises postgraduate research, and plays an important role in shaping national legal and policy reforms that advance human rights and justice. It is also my great honor to introduce Shranti Gunardana, Senior Attorney at Law and a true pioneer in our legal profession. Enrolled as an attorney at law in 1975, she has dedicated over 5 decades to the practice of law, serving with distinction in both corporate and private sectors before establishing her own successful practice. She has held key leadership roles within the Bar Association of Sri Lanka and has contributed to national law reforms. As president of the Women Lawyers Association of Sri Lanka, she continues to mentor and empower women in law. Celebrating 50 years at the bar in 2025, her career reflects resilience, integrity, and unwavering commitment to justice. It is my pleasure to introduce Yanina Veerasinghe, Head of Group Legal at Brandix Group of Companies. With over 14 years in-house counsel experience across telecommunications, apparel, and IT industries, she oversees legal operations of Sri Lanka and international jurisdictions. An attorney at law and notary public, she holds postgraduate qualifications from the University of Colombo and the University of Wolverhampton. Beyond her corporate leadership, she actively contributes to the Bar Association of Sri Lanka and serves as an advisor to the Colombo International Arbitration Center. Her career reflects how women can excel and lead in complex multinational environments. Finally, it is a pleasure to introduce Tanushka Gunawardhan, attorney at law, a respected practitioner with over 23 years of experience in civil and commercial litigation. Known for her dedication, integrity, and strategic insight, she has built a distinguished practice grounded in legal excellence. Beyond her professional accomplishment, she is a strong advocate for inclusive workplaces and empowering women to take on leadership roles. Her journey reflects resilience and commitment, inspiring the next generation of women in law. Ladies and gentlemen, on this Women's Day, we are truly honored to be guided by such an accomplished and inspiring panel. Please join me in warmly welcoming all of our distinguished resource persons. I would like to invite Her Ladyship, Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, Professor Vasantha Seneviratne, who is joining online with us today, Mrs. Shiranti Gunardana, Ms. Yanina Veerasinghe, and our moderator, Ms. Tanushka Gunawardana, for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. You have already been introduced to the distinguished panelists present before you today. We look forward to them sharing their views, insights, and extensive experiences on inclusive leadership from position to purpose. My first question is to our chief guest, Her Ladyship Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe. Madam, in the judiciary, how does inclusive leadership strengthen public confidence?
Confidence in the judiciary isn't just about whether decisions are technically correct. It's about legitimacy. Courts in a constitutional democracy don't command authority through force. They earn it through trust. Inclusive leadership builds that trust in three ways. First, it improves how people perceive fairness. Second, it strengthens judicial reasoning. Third, it shows that the judiciary practices the value it upholds. Article 12 guarantees equality under the law. If our institutions reflect that commitment internally, people see that justice is not just a principle on paper, it is lived in practice. That is my short answer.
Thank you, Your Ladyship. The second question to you, Your Ladyship, is how can a senior judicial officer ensure that young lawyers, especially women, feel seen and heard?
It starts in the courtroom. A judge sets the professional tone, listening patiently, allowing equal opportunity to present arguments, treating counsel with respect. They are not small gestures. They signal that every voice matters. I always make it a point to acknowledge good submissions because it matters a lot, especially to juniors. When they make good submissions, we must make it a point to appreciate that. And if there are shortcomings, that also we should be able to tell them in a subtle manner. Outside the courtroom, mentorship and sponsorship are key roles. Senior judges and senior members of the bar must go beyond encouragement to actively facilitate opportunities, nominating young lawyers for important matters, inviting them to professional forums, and supporting structural mentorship programs through the Bar Association. Transparency also matters a lot. When criteria for recognition and advancement are clear, ambition becomes achievable rather than just aspirational. And safety is non-negotiable. Lawyers must know that harassment or misconduct complaints will be treated seriously and fairly. A profession that safeguards dignity retains talent. Supporting young lawyers isn't about favorism. It's about intentionally preparing the next generation of leaders.
Thank you, Your Ladyship. Now to Professor Vasantha Seniviratna, who is joining us online. Madam, Professor, you can hear me?
Yes, am I audible? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me.
Shall we then move on to the...
It looks like some technical problem prevails.
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You can hear us?
Thank you very much. Let me, before your questions, very briefly, I'm so proud and honored to be invited to speak at this very momentous occasion, and I'm very much inspired by Her Ladyship's very thought-provoking speech, because I'm in this post and not in a position to come in person, that I have to come today online. Thank you for facilitating for that.
Thank you, Professor, once again for joining us. Firstly, from an academic perspective, how do you define inclusive leadership?
That is a very good question. From an academic perspective, inclusive leadership is not simply about diversity. Always we talk about the diversity, gender injustice, or any other community injustices, but this inclusive leadership is going beyond that and not only counting numbers or fulfilling quotas. Inclusive leadership is a normative and structural approach to give the leadership with the necessary power, the agency, and with authority in making the decisions. So, the inclusive leadership requires to ensure the recognition of difference, removal of structural barriers, equal access to opportunity, and the meaningful participation in decision making. So, in constitutional terms, inclusive leadership operationalizes substantive equality. It is not mere simple equity or equality guarantee. It asks not merely is everyone formally equal, but rather who is structurally disadvantaged and how do we correct that imbalance. Therefore, that we see in examples in the world, for an good example, Jacinda Ardern, whose leadership was not defined merely by the fact that she was a young woman prime minister, but her empathetic and inclusive approach to governance, especially in moments of national crisis. Likewise, the India's election of Draupadi Murmu, the first tribal woman president, carries deep symbolic significance. So in Sri Lanka also we have a woman prime minister. But despite all these salutary achievements, that we cannot say the inclusive leadership is guaranteed. For an example, the introduction of the 25% quota for women in local government was a structural reform, but inclusion became meaningful only when these elected women participate in the decision making with authority. So including leadership, therefore, is not presence alone, it is agency.
Thank you, Professor. And the second question to you is inclusive leadership a moral obligation, a governance strategy, or both?
Well, the answer could be the both. As lawyers, legal academicians, we recognize the moral foundations of equality in international human rights law. The United Nations Charter and human rights instruments affirm dignity and non-discrimination as universal principles. So, in that respect, inclusion is a moral obligation flowing from those inherent dignity of every human being. However, inclusion is also a governance strategy. Modern institutional research shows that inclusive institutions are more stable, more innovative, and more legitimate. When people see themselves reflected in decision making structures, the trust in institutions increases. So we can consider the constitutional provisions as our Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe said. Article 12, and in particular Article 12.4, can be broadly interpreted to advance substantive equality leading to inclusive leadership. Our own experiences demonstrate that exclusion reduces alienation while inclusion reduces legitimacy. Therefore, inclusive leadership is ethically required and pragmatically necessary.
Thank you, Professor, for your insights. Now to Mrs. Shiranti
I hope
Gunawardena.
you could hear me.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for joining us. There's a few more questions for you, so please stay on with us. To Mrs. Shiranti Gunawardena, Senior Instructing Attorney. Madam, the first question to you is, in legal chambers and professional bodies, what does inclusive leadership look like in practice?
Thank you for the question, Tanushka. Inclusive leadership, legal chambers and professional bodies is the deliberate restructuring, power, opportunity and accountability. In my opinion, it's very, very important as senior lawyers that we should always to educate, and empower our juniors and our apprentices. Actually, it should start at the apprenticeship. I strictly believe that when an apprentice come to you, you must treat them as a professional and a lawyer and train them and empower them. And I'm very happy to say I have about 150 juniors have gone through my chambers, and most of them are doing very well, not in only in this country, in other countries also. That is because we have to empower them, to include them, and then only they will develop themselves. Thank you.
Madam, the second question to you is, how do senior lawyers avoid becoming gatekeepers instead of mentors?
Actually, when you're a senior lawyer, you have to act as a mentor, not as a gatekeeper. When you act as a mentor, you can do so much for them. I will share with you all two stories of two of my juniors without mentioning their names. There was a girl who came from far, far south to my chambers. Actually, her father was also not in a very affluent or a very respected profession. But however, when this girl first came to me, you know, the first case, once she took courts, I sent her to courts to see it. The injunction was given against my client, a corporate client. But I told her, no, don't worry, we'll proceed, we'll fight it. And every time when I had to go to courts, I took her, and we were able to overturn the case and get it our favor. And also I would like to say, today, she is practicing on her own, and when I act as a consultant to some of the corporate bodies, when I ask, who is your panel lawyer, they will give her name. Number two, there was another girl who came to my office, where I'm sharing these stories so that we will know why should we become mentors. This girl came to my office, she said, Madam, I would like to do my apprenticeship with you. I said, okay, you are welcome. Then she said, also, I went to another firm and there they told me to sign a bond for 3 years. So I'm not prepared to do this. So in fact, this girl came to me and after a little while, she said, no, I want to join government service. She went away. Again, she told me, no, I would like to come back. And I'm very happy to say, today she's holding a very senior position because we gave her confidence, and mentoring means training them, teaching about professional ethics, and giving them the courage. Face, I think most of the lady lawyers can do very well if we do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Miss Yanina Veerasinghe, my first question to you is in corporate governance, how is inclusive leadership measured?
Thank you, Tanushka. I just want to say good evening to the distinguished audience. Good evening to Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, Secretary-elect. And I think Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya has been doing a lot of good work for our profession, so very happy about it. Good evening to her ladyship. I just told her that I'm feeling quite nervous to be seated next to her in the same panel. And good evening to the President's Councils and essentially everyone who's distinguished and all of you who are listening in. I think if we just take a quick look at this panel right here, I think this right here sums up diversity, because I'm a corporate lawyer. I'm seeing a lot of big faces in litigation, which I don't usually see. I'm seated next to her ladyship, who I appeared before many moons ago. So in a number of contexts, whether it's not gender-based, but if you look at various other forms of diversity in this context, I would say this forum is a very classic example of inclusivity and diversity in its truest form. So I head the group legal function for the Brandix group of companies, which is headquartered in Sri Lanka, but we are spanned out in about 9 jurisdictions, and I overlook all of those operations. And I'm also very much a part of the diversity and inclusivity pillar within the group. So it's basically those expertise that I would bring into this context. In relation to your question, which I think was how does corporate governance essentially measure inclusive leadership? I think that's an interesting question, because we no longer measure it by the declarations and the policies that we have in place. Even in our own organization, we will have a lot of declarations and policies in place simply because there are customer requirements, supplier requirements to do so. But I think today the yardstick in terms of measuring diversity and inclusion relies more on the outcome as opposed to the optics, if you will. If I'm sort of going to approach it in a more metaphorical as well as a literal meaning, who sits at the decision-making table? It's not about who sits at the table, but who has the vote to sort of factor in a decision. That is something that I would say is a yardstick. Similarly, whose voices are heard, whether it's the meeting room, the boardroom, or the courtroom. I think we females sometimes tend to feel that our voices are drowned. It's not about having a voice if your voice is not listened to, heard to, and I think that again would be an interesting yardstick. And also who progresses through the promotion pipeline, because you might be shortlisted simply to fulfill a quota in terms of numbers, but are you really going to progress? Those are the measurements that we would look into. If I look at it in a more factual perspective, I would say the World Economic Forum has the diversity metrics. And then especially with regard to ESG reporting, I'm a fan of ESG reporting because it really looks into board composition. It really helps organizations kind of look at the composition in terms of diversity. And then it'll also look at equitable pay, equitable promotion, and also employee engagement surveys where you can get a lot of feedback. So I would say those are essentially the measurements. And if you look at it in a very practical way, diversity is basically being present. It's just fulfilling numbers. But inclusivity is where you are actually being influential. And that, I would think, is the yardstick that the corporate sector really looks at when it comes to diversity.
The second question to you is gender diversity alone sufficient? I think you just answered that one with, or must leaders actively cultivate inclusive culture?
Thanks. I think that again is an interesting question, because we tend to find diversity and inclusion used as interchangeable terms, whereas they are fundamentally different. Like I mentioned, diversity is presence. I think it has a lot to do with optics, where you have a number of females, since we are talking about gender diversity in this context, but even if you look at generational diversity, you might have optics, you might have presence. But when you look at inclusivity, inclusivity essentially is about the influence, the amount of influence that is exerted through diversity. So in that context, what I would want to say is, for example, I think diversity is the point of departure. It is not the point of arrival. The point of arrival would in place be inculcating an inclusive culture, which is something the corporate sector needs to do, which is something the leadership needs to do. Because you might have females, since we're talking about gender diversity, you might have females in the decision-making table, but are their decisions or are their thoughts really resonated in the decisions that we reach? I think that is the bigger question, and that is where the whole inclusive culture really comes into play, where you sort of foster a culture where everyone's opinions are respected, acknowledged. Maybe you don't essentially factor that in, but you really take it into account when you come up with the final decision, and you create that psychological free space for people to come up with their views, and in this case, females. So essentially, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And my final question to you is, I think moving once more in the line of what you already said, how can corporate leaders avoid tokenism when appointing women?
So tokenism is essentially, I think this basically happens when you look at diversity as well as inclusivity in terms of a symbol, rather than perhaps looking at it as a strategy. So I think that is where we really need to sort of change the way we think, and that is essentially where the leaders in the corporate sector, since I represent the corporate sector, would really need to work on. Because we need to have, I think, her ladyship mentioned about coaching and mentoring. I think that is essentially something that's a very pivotal component of ensuring that we don't just stick to tokenism, that something meaningful comes about it. It could be coaching, it could be mentoring, there should be succession planning. Essentially, those are the components that will really make a difference between tokenism versus actual inclusivity, which I think would be the game changer. And what I want to say is we need to look at cerebral opportunities. So my mother is also a senior lawyer, and I think I've learned a lot from her. And what I want to say is what we are looking at should not be to simply give a woman an opportunity simply because she's a woman. What corporates should be doing is they should be able to select the best talented person out of their pool. And if that talented person is a woman, a female, that should not preclude them from selecting her. And I think that's where the real change happens, and that is where tokenism is defeated, and you have the meaningful inclusivity in place.
Thank you, Anina. Thank you. Professor Vasantha, we have 2 more questions for you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me again?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Professor, how does inclusive leadership connect with constitutional values such as equality and dignity?
Constitutional values are very important. Those should be guaranteed. We understand that most modern constitutions, including our constitution, guarantee equality before the law. But equality can be either formal or substantive. So formal equality says treat everyone the same. In contrast, substantive equality are structural disadvantages preventing equal participation. Therefore, inclusive leadership belongs to the second category, not to the formal equality, but to the substantive equality. It gives life to constitutional promises. The value of dignity developed strongly in South African constitutional jurisprudence and increasingly in Indian constitutional law and in Sri Lankan jurisprudence as well. Recognize every person as a moral agent, not merely a subject of governance. So I know as a professor as well as now a member of the Sri Lanka Constitutional Council, how much we are owed to do to protect our women and other vulnerable groups who are excluded from the substantive equality. Dignity demands the voice, and dignity demands participation. Also, dignity demands respect in decision making spaces. That is very crucial. When institutions, whether courts or any government departments, universities, commissions, consciously remove barriers and empower women and other marginalized groups, they are not engaging in political correctness. They are fulfilling the constitutional morality. So it is very important, therefore, to ensure the constitutional values that guarantee that inclusion transform constitutional text into constitutional practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And one final question to you. Is inclusion merely representation or is it participation in decision making?
Perhaps this is the most important question. Representation without decision-making authority becomes, as all of you talked about, tokenism. Participation with influence becomes transformation. So we find in Sri Lanka also women's representation in parliament remains not, although the numbers are now rising, it remains limited. However, where women have chaired committees or influenced legislative debates or social welfare and any other issues gain stronger policy visibility. Therefore, I believe that inclusive leadership requires representation with active participation, with agency and authority to make decisions. So, inclusion must move from symbolic presence to structural participation. Therefore, my final answer is that mere representation would not be the answer to these exclusionary practices prevail long time, the formidable barriers, but it should be the actual participation with the authority to make the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. The final question to you today, Mrs. Gunawardene, is what responsibility do seniors have in creating space for young female lawyers?
Thank you, Tanushka. Actually, creating space is a very important aspect where the junior lawyer is concerned. They should have a balance in their home front, managing their husbands and sometimes even their in-laws. Especially young junior lawyers, once they get married and once they have children, find it very difficult to balance both. And there are so many brilliant young ladies who have given up their talents, given up their practices due to this reason. So therefore, it's an important factor that we should always think of providing space for them by providing pressures where their children can be looked after. And in easy flexi hours is another thing that you can introduce, because if you have flexi hours, they have more time to spend for their children. Therefore, creating space is a very important thing, and as a senior lawyer, even corporate should take a leaf out of this, and if they can give flexi hours and to work from home, then we will get more brilliant junior lawyers coming up and becoming leaders.
Thank you, Mrs. Gunawardene. Your Ladyship, we have one final question to you. Does hierarchy limit inclusion, or can authority coexist with accessibility?
Hierarchy is part of how the judiciary works. It ensures coherence, consistency, and orderly development of law. Without it, things would fall apart. But hierarchy doesn't have to mean exclusion. Authority only becomes a problem when it is exercised without transparency, humility, or openness. Independence relates to decision making. Accessibility relates to culture. They can coexist. A judge can be firm in decisions while remaining approachable. Clear reasoning, respectful engagement, participation in reform discussions, these don't weaken authority, they strengthen it. authority grounded in constitutional values. Equality and fairness lasts longer than authority based on distance of formality alone. So, hierarchy doesn't limit inclusion. It's how power is exercised that matters. When authority is principled and humane, it naturally aligns with accessibility, and that is the real strength of judicial leadership.
Thank you, Your Ladyship. Now, if the audience has any questions for our panelists, now is the time to ask the questions. Yep. Seems like we have covered all areas. Okay. Are you sure you don't have any questions? Okay, then thank you. Now, once again, thank you to the esteemed panelists and the attentive audience. On a personal note, thank you to the BASL Women Lawyers Professional and Career Development Standing Committee and the Women Lawyers Association of Sri Lanka for having me as the moderator to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, and we would like to request the panelists and the moderator to remain on stage. And we would like to invite the President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, as well as Mrs. Indika Nagaratna Kottagoda, the Chairperson of the Women Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee of the Bar Association, to hand over the following tokens of appreciation to our wonderful panel as well as to our wonderful moderator this evening. And we also invite our co-chairperson, Mrs. Nalani Manatunga, also to join the handing over of the tokens of appreciation. And first and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, our chief guest and also one of our panelists, Honorable Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we invite Ms. Shiranthi Gunawardena, Senior Attorney at Law. And we invite Ms. Yanini Veerasinghe, one of our panelists. And Ms. Tanushka Gunawardena, Attorney at Law, the moderator of the Women's Day Celebration Seminar on Inclusive Leadership. And ladies and gentlemen, we also have a special token of appreciation for someone who has been working so hard for the BASL within the past few years. And before we invite her, I think the Women's Lawyers Association as well as the subcommittee would like to give a special mention about her, and we would have. So we will have Ms. Charmaine Pereira for that introduction.
On this Women's Day, we proudly honor Ms. Surani Samarasekara for her 10 years of dedicated and supportive service as Administrative Secretary and for the valuable contribution to the lawyer community. It is my privilege to invite her to receive this token of appreciation and recognition of her commitment and excellence.
Thank you, and we request all of you to be seated. Before we go on to the next session, we have one more token of appreciation. I think this token of appreciation will be given by the Women Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka to none other than the President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya. As a token, not only in commemoration of today's event, but for your commitment for women's empowerment and equality. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. And we have one more speech for today, and we would like to invite Mrs. Renuka Jayatilaka of the Sri Lanka Women's Lawyers Association to introduce and invite the next speaker.
Thank you, Shihara. Mrs. Dilani Atawaka, you are most welcome to this seminar on inclusive leadership. We know you are a non-lawyer, but the moment you enter this auditorium, you become one of us. Mrs. Yatawaka is the Managing Director and the CEO of the Ideal Motors Private Limited. She's a fellow member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka. She's also a fellow member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, UK, and also a fellow member of the Institute of Certified Management Accountants in Sri Lanka. I must also say, apart from her professional career as an accountant in the accounting field, she's a sports person. As far as I know, she plays cricket, she plays netball, and also she's a good runner. And a super dancer. I have seen her dancing even after a sports injury wearing crutches. I have seen that. She's going to be officially appointed as the president of the PPA of her alma mater, St. Bridget's Convent, on 5th of March at their AGM. Above all, she's a woman. By virtue of being a woman, she's a daughter to her parents, a sister to her siblings, a wife to a husband, and a doting mother to her beautiful 3 daughters. Though she plays all these different roles, she's a remarkably outstanding and a well-known personality.
And therefore, I thought it's most appropriate that we invite her for this gathering. The podium is yours, Mrs. Yatawaka, to address the lawyers present here on whatever the topic you have chosen. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the organizing committee, particularly Renuka, who asked me to be with you all today. I'm actually quite nervous. I've never been in a room full of so many lawyers in my life, but quite happy to be here because one of my great-grand-aunts was Eslin Obesegara Deranyagala, the first woman barrister at law in Sri Lanka. And my great-grandfather happens to be Donald Obesegara, who also served in the Legislative Council in Ceylon, then it was called Ceylon. So as a child, I actually wanted to be a lawyer because I come from a family of lawyers. But my father said, you know, as a girl, you'll be always inundated with other people's problems. So better you choose the finance profession and go down that route. I'm not here to talk for long, but on the 8th of March, International Women's Day will celebrate its 115th year. And this year the theme is Give to Gain. There were some very insightful speeches and statistics by Your Lordship, as well as the BASL President, where though we have many women lawyers taking on the profession, as the years go by, the funnel that creates the seniority and the hierarchy becomes smaller and smaller. And that is something that we see not only in the legal profession, but even in other professions across all industries. Being in the corporate sector for the last 25 years, I've served on many boards as probably the only female. I've broken the barrier now of being the first MD CEO, first female MD CEO in Sri Lanka in the automotive sector. It has not been an easy journey because in the automotive sector where I've done my entire career, it's naturally male dominated. But I think the greatest thing is, as females, stemming from what Mrs. Gunawardena said, which I completely agree, as women, we have many other roles to play, not just the corporate career or the occupation that we are in. As mothers, as homemakers, our primary goal and responsibility, which I believe, is to the home. And unless we have superiors, male superiors, who are willing to listen to that and to support us, it is going to be extremely difficult for females to go up in the ladder to make a career in whatever they do. And another issue I see today is the Gen Zs, as we call them, the younger generations who are extremely difficult to satisfy. They want quick results, they want quick ways to go up the ladder, and that is a challenge which we are all going to face in the next couple of years. So these are things that we will have to adapt and change to, and also accept the fact that if we want to see more women in the hierarchy, then we have to encourage our sons, our brothers, our fathers, our uncles to start supporting the female occupation, to support them, like Mrs. Gunawardena quite correctly said, flexi hours to other mechanisms. It is only then, I believe, that we will see greater participation in all industries across the land, because that is the primary problem that women today face. So I'm here just to say that, and when Renuka asked me to come, I thought it's quite apt, I can't come, ata vana. So, I'd like to give something from the organization to the lady members of the BASL, as well as the members of the SLWLA. And I assure you, men, the gentlemen that are here, we will extend the offer to you soon after the month of March is completed, because we do not wish to have any form of gender bias. So I like to invite Indika, who's our DGM sales, to just introduce. We have a lovely car from Mahindra. It's called the 3XO, which we will give to you as with a special offer, whoever would like to avail it. The car is parked downstairs. If on your way out, you can take a look or come later to the organization. But I just thought we'll give you something. And with that, thank you very much for inviting me and having me here.
Thank you so much. And it's certainly refreshing to see women in roles of leadership, especially in the corporate sector. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our closing remarks. We respectfully invite Mrs. Nalini Manatunga, the co-chairperson of the Women Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, for the closing remarks.
Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, President Bar Association of Sri Lanka, Secretary-elect, President Councils, distinguished panelists, distinguished invitees, my dear colleagues. As we conclude this evening's seminar, I wish to express our sincere appreciation to our distinguished panelists and speakers. Especially distinguished panelists from the bench, from academia, from the bar, and from the corporate sector. Each of you has illuminated inclusive leadership, not as theory, but as lived responsibility. You have reminded us that inclusion is not a slogan. It's not a ceremonial word reserved for special occasions. It's a daily responsibility. Today, we examine inclusive leadership, but perhaps we truly examine ourselves. Across our professions, we now see more women appointed to positions of authority. This progress is real. This progress deserves celebration, but today invites a deeper reflection. Is holding a post the same as being a leader? A position gives authority, but leadership gives direction. A title gives recognition, but leadership gives purpose. A post may command obedience, but leadership inspires confidence. There is a clear difference between governance and leadership. Governance maintains systems. Leadership transforms them. Governance protects structures. Leadership builds people. Governance asks, how do I manage this institution? Leadership asks, who will grow because I was here. Inclusive leadership is not about occupying space. It's about creating space. Space for a young lawyer to complete her submissions without hesitation. Space for a junior professional to be evaluated by competence, not assumption. Space for new voices to participate in decision making, as Ms. Veerasinghe described moment before. Especially for those of us who have crossed barriers once thought immovable, the responsibility is greater. If our success becomes closed circle, leadership fails. If our success becomes an open pathway, leadership succeeds. International Women's Day is therefore not merely a celebration. It's a legacy. One day, the next generation will look back and ask, did they merely hold office? Or did they transform institutions? Did they preserve comfort? Or did they expand opportunities? Let it be said, we chose leadership. Leadership that listens. Leadership that includes. Leadership that uplifts. Because positions will change. Titles will pass. Committees will end. But leadership leaves footprints. Years from now, young women entering our profession will not ask who held office. They will ask who made the path steadier, who believed in us, who opened the door. Let the answer be us. Let our leadership not be measured by the chairs we occupy, but by the doors we leave open. May we raise and may we take others forward with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nalini Manatunga. And I think before we move on to our vote of thanks, we have a representative of Ideal Motors who wish to give a brief introduction for the special offer which was made to all of you today. I think all of you all are excited about this offer which was made earlier. And we would like to invite a representative of Ideal Motors to give a brief introduction about this car and to show you why you should definitely get it.
Thank you very much, Your Lordship, honorable guests. I am representing Ideal Motors. My name is Indika. We have a lovely car that suits all lawyers, male or female, but the president said it was expensive. It's not with the features that we got. And it's parked out there. It's called the 3XO, which is a variant that is being exported to Australia, New Zealand, and a few other European countries. So because of the Women's Day and because of this invitation, we are happy to discount $295,000 from a vehicle purely because of our women leader, Dilani Hatavaka. So hope to see you downstairs. Inspect the car if you have time. If not, please, I'm there to help you out, to lay out the variants and the features. It's full of feature packed, and safety-wise, it's number one. Please join us after the event and have a look. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and once again, our thanks goes out to Ideal Motors for that special offer. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to formally conclude today's event, we very respectfully invite Ms. Kaushali Samaratunga for the vote of thanks.
Good evening, distinguished guests, respected members of the bar, and dear colleagues. As we conclude this meaningful celebration of the Women's Day under the theme Inclusive Leadership, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks. Our heartfelt gratitude to Your Ladyship, Mrs. Kumudini, Justice Kumudini Wickramasinghe, Judge of the Supreme Court, whose distinguished presence and profound insight remind us that leadership grounded in integrity and courage transforms institutions and strengthens justice. We extend our sincere appreciation to Professor Vasantha Seniviratne, Senior Professor and Chair of Public and International Law at the Faculty of Law, University of Colombo, for enriching us with her academic depth, clarity, thought, and visionary perspective. Our warm thanks to Mrs. Shiranthi Gunawardena, Senior Attorney at Law, for sharing her invaluable professional experience and practical wisdom drawn from years of distinguished service at the bar. We are equally grateful to Yanina Veerasinghe, Attorney at Law and Head of Legal Brandix, for bringing the corporate legal perspective to today's discussion and demonstrating how inclusive leadership operates across diverse professional spaces. A special note of appreciation to our moderator, Ms. Tanushka Gunawardena, Attorney at Law, for guiding the discussion with poise, balance, and professionalism. We also wish to place on record and sincere appreciation to Mrs. Indika Nagaratna Kothagoda and Ms. Nalini Manatunga for their invaluable guidance, advice, and steady leadership to the committee throughout the organizing of this event. The direction and encouragement were instrumental in bringing this program to fruition. Our gratitude is also extended to the Women Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee, the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, together with the Sri Lanka Women Lawyers Association, for their commitment in organizing and this significant and timely initiative. And also to the Bar Association, the President, Mr. Rajiv Amarasurya. Thank you, sir. Finally, to every woman lawyer present here today, your presence itself is leadership. Your resilience strengthens the bar. Your voice shapes justice, and your solidarity ensures that inclusion becomes not merely an inspiration, but a professional standard. May we continue to lift one another as we rise, lead with courage and compassion, and leave behind a profession stronger, fairer, and more inclusive than we found it. Thank you. Happy Women's Day.
Thank you very much. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka and the Women Lawyers Professional and Career Development Committee, as well as the Sri Lanka Women's Lawyers Association, we would like to thank everyone who took part in this important discussion. And we would like to invite you all for refreshments right after this, and also take some time to have a look at the special car which is available, which is parked right outside by Ideal Motors Private Limited. I think it will be a very good investment. Thank you and have a very good evening.